cutting supply to push up prices. Some of the top oil-producing countries have reached an agreement. So what does it mean for consumers? And how long will this deal between OPEC rivals and allies last? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Sika. The world's major oil producers agreed to slash production after meeting in Vienna in the hopes of getting prices up again. The cuts by OPEC and other producers outside the cartel will take 1.2 million barrels a day from world markets. The price of oil has tumbled from $85 a barrel in October to $60 this week, but it needed the agreement of non-OPEC member Russia. We'll bring in our guests in a moment, but first, this report from Paul Brennan in Vienna.
For more than 40 years, OPEC controlled the global oil industry, the group's near monopoly keeping a tight rein on supply and on prices. The events of this week in Vienna shows those days are truly over. Despite consensus that a cut in production was needed to stop a slide in the oil price, Thursday's gathering of just the OPEC member states failed to agree detailed numbers. And so on Friday, as the meeting expanded to include non-OPEC members, all eyes were on Alexander Novak, the Russian energy minister.
After a thorough analysis which we have been conducting of the market situation, we will be ready to come to a mutual understanding on how to take our cooperation further.
The final figures: OPEC members will reduce output by 800,000 barrels a day. The non-OPEC countries will hold back a further 400,000 barrels. Iran, Libya and Venezuela will be exempted. The prospect of cutting 1.2 million barrels a day was enough to push Brent crude above $63 from below $59 the previous day.
Going back to the supply-demand, we believe that there is substantial volumes out there as a result of releasing the spare capacity that need to be withdrawn, and we hope that we will come to an agreement where all producers will contribute with an equal cut across the board.
There was significant transparency in who was going to be doing the cut. So, for example, the Saudi government laid out their path to basically removing barrels. The Russian government also gave us into a window about what their reductions would be. So I think this statement was actually more transparent than expected. I think it actually is a more robust cut than we expected in the last couple of days.
But what happens here in Vienna is only part of the picture. The United States is now the world's biggest crude oil producer, narrowly eclipsing Russia and with Saudi Arabia in third. The fact is, OPEC no longer calls the shots.
This has been a hard-fought compromise deal, and the fact it's been so difficult emphasizes the limits now of OPEC's effectiveness. And there are still question marks as to how long the deal done here will actually last. Paul Brennan, Al Jazeera, Vienna.
Well, so in October, Brent crude oil prices reached a 3-year high, but they then crashed around 30% from early October, prompting this week's decision in Vienna. That's despite US President Donald Trump urging Saudi Arabia and others to keep prices down. The US this year became the world's top oil producer for the first time since 1973. Saudi Arabia and Russia are second and third. Other big oil producers, Iran, Libya and Venezuela, have all been exempt from making any production cuts in this deal. Let's bring in our guests now. Joining us on Skype from Moscow, we have Nikolay Surgov, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of World Economy and International Relations. In London, Mamdouh Salameh, an international oil economist. And in Leesburg, Virginia, Hossein Askari, Professor of International Business and International Affairs at George Washington University. Good to have you all with us, gentlemen. Mamdouh Salameh, let me start with you. What do you make of this decision by OPEC and others? Was it perhaps a bit more aggressive than many were expecting?
I think it is a good decision and a practical one to stop the decline of the oil prices. It might not result immediately in higher oil prices, but it is a step in the right direction, especially with the contribution or major contribution from Saudi Arabia and a slightly less contribution from Russia. It will even be a correction of a mistake made in June by Saudi Arabia under pressure from President Trump and Russia when they added 650,000 barrels of oil to the market, and that increased an already existing glut in the market. That was one reason why the prices gone down. There is another reason, which is the realization by the global oil market that the US sanctions on Iran have not yet cost Iran a single barrel of oil. And so the market relaxed, assuming that there will be no supply deficiency in the global oil market.
Well, let's put that point then to Hossein Askari. Is this partly an effort to correct a decision that was made earlier in the year in June when they decided to pump more oil to make up for the lost Iranian supplies and prevent prices spiking?
Well, I think that that what's going on is that, in fact, Saudi Arabia, as was just mentioned by your previous guest, Saudi Arabia increased its oil production. And I think that now the sacrifice that Saudi Arabia is supposedly making is not really any kind of a sacrifice, because it had increased its oil production by quite a bit earlier this year. And so when you take that from a base, to cut back from that base is not that much of a sacrifice. However, I think that when I look at the history of OPEC, I can tell you that I don't think that this decision will do very much. OPEC has never been able to not cheat, to be able to stick together. And now we're really talking more about not just OPEC, but OPEC including non-OPEC. So I don't think this will have that much of an effect on prices. I think what's much, much more important in this scheme of things is the state of the world economy. If, in fact, what happens to demand, I think right now is the key.
Well, you're in the U.S., Hossein Askari. What about the Trump factor in all of this? We know the U.S. president has been tweeting about wanting to keep prices low, yet the Saudi Arabia's energy minister, Khalid Falih, said that this decision was made out of economic necessity and, in his words, not driven by any political agenda. In other words, he's saying we're going to do what we need to do, and it really doesn't matter what President Trump tweets about it.
Well, I think the Saudi oil minister is rather brave in saying that. I'm sorry to say it. That's not the history of things. But I think for Mr. Trump, there are a number of balancing issues that are at play here. On the one hand, I think he would like to see lower oil prices because that helps his base. It's like a tax cut in a sense when you have lower oil prices. And also, I think why he needs lower oil prices is that all indications are that the United States economy will go into a recession later next year. And so if you have a recession, that will also hurt him, because what that will do is that there'll be more unemployment. And with the election coming up in 2020, he will be in an untenable position. So he would like to see lower oil prices for that. But on the other hand, he has another problem, which is when you have lower oil prices, the U.S. stock market generally goes down. And that's added to volatility and the U.S. stock market going down. And so I think Mr. Trump has got a real problem on his hand. But on balance, I think he would like to see lower oil prices.
Nikolay Surgov, the point was made in Paul's report there that this deal could not have been done without Russia. It needed Russia on board to get this done. What does that say about how important a player it is now in the global oil market, not being an OPEC member itself? And what does it say about OPEC's power in all of this?
Well, OPEC, from the Russian point of view, OPEC is still strong and influential. That is why Russia is actually cooperating with OPEC. And for Russia, OPEC is the only partner that can help really to stabilize the prices. Moscow is now interested in raising the prices as high as possible because, well, most of the government revenue comes from the oil exports. And of course, Russia is ready to supply about 1/3 of the cuts. So it is an important contribution, and Russia is ready to work with Saudi Arabia in maintaining high oil prices. And I think this decision by OPEC was a very strong sign, was a very important sign that Russia and Saudi Arabia will work together on the oil market in order to maintain high prices. It's a declaration of sorts, both economically and politically. And I think both countries are very much concerned with the consequences of the US efforts to increase production of oil in North America and of the Iranian sanctions, because despite the fact that until now the sanctions didn't hit Iran that seriously, there is an expectation that Iran very quickly will start exporting more. And if you talk about cheating, well, that's what's being expected. And Iran will export at much lower prices than now. So we need to take precautions in order to stabilize the market and to maintain high prices.
Mamdouh, Salameh, how much influence does OPEC as a cartel really have on world prices today? The fact that it has to bring in Russia and others in on this.
First, OPEC is not a cartel. It has never been at all. In fact, it was founded in Baghdad in 1960 to confront the cartel of the Seven Sisters. Its influence has gone through embargoes, through wars, through conflicts, but it has survived. It has a vital role to play in the global oil market, in stabilizing that market and stabilizing oil prices. Facts favor the role of OPEC because OPEC accounts for 42.7% of global production and more than 71.8% of global proven oil reserves. So by all accounts, it is a very, very influential organization, and it will continue to be. But to make it stronger, it needs always the cohesion of its members, and sometimes the policies of Saudi Arabia diverge from the policies of the overwhelming majority of OPEC, as happened in 2014 when Saudi Arabia decided to flood the global oil market instead of joining OPEC to cut production to stabilize the oil prices.
Hossein, Askari, what does all this mean then for consumers, particularly for motorists, for prices at the pump? I mean, obviously, if the prices are going to go up, that's going to mean higher petrol prices, higher energy prices. How much of an effect is that going to have on people's pocketbooks?
Well, if I may just go back to what was just said, and I will definitely address your question, I have to very much disagree with what was just said. In the case of OPEC, I totally agree that OPEC has never really acted as an effective cartel. But if you go back to OPEC, even during the Arab oil embargo of 1973-74, the Arab members of OPEC, they even cheated themselves. Saudi Arabia sold oil to the US fleet. Iraq, in fact, did not hold back its output. So that you take into account what is said at generally OPEC meetings is rather meaningless. The thing that matters is, can they stick together? And I can assure you that Saudi Arabia and Iran have nothing in common to agree on anymore. During all this time that I have been involved and known what's going on between the two countries, I can assure you that there has been no cooperation behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, or anywhere on the scene. So what was done at the OPEC meeting to me is, I'm sorry to say, rather meaningless. I think what matters is, can they stick together? And for that, I'm not really very optimistic. Now, what this does, I think, to consumers is very clearly this, that when you look at it in the case of the United States, people expect oil prices maybe to go up a little bit during next year. However, this at the same time will in fact influence shale oil production in the United States. It will give a boost to shale oil production. And so I think that oil prices in the United States may go up very, very little in the short run, but during next year, and with the recession looming, I believe oil prices, in fact, will go down in the United States.
Nikolay Surgov, what's your view on that? Does this further incentivize fracking in the U.S., and what implications is that going to have for Russia's oil production?
Well, this is correct, that higher oil prices are a stimulus, are an incentive for the U.S. producers to increase shale oil production. It's true. And we know about these consequences. But currently, I think both Russia and Saudi Arabia need high prices. And they need them now because of the current economic situation, which requires more income. So Russia is ready to take the risks, and I think the Saudis are also ready to take the risks. But in the longer term, even in the mid-term, we understand here that high oil prices will mean more shale oil on the market, and that thus we stimulate the production in the US. And actually, the previous efforts by Saudi Arabia, I mean the increased production and increased exports, they were meant, from our point of view, they were meant to strangle the US shale oil production, but it didn't work. And besides, there is no other choice now. Both countries need revenues, and they need them now, so the risks are, well, they are ready to put up with the risks. And speaking about the influence of OPEC, by the way, yes, OPEC as it was pretty weak, and there was the problem of cheating. And it's true that the Saudis have their controversies with the Iranians, but this is why the Saudis are working with the Russians. And this is why the Saudis are trying to create what we call now OPEC Plus. And OPEC Plus will be a much stronger institution that can really influence the oil market. And this is the only solution in the light of the current efforts made by the US in order to increase shale oil production. And so we have to adjust, and OPEC has to adjust to a new situation in the oil market with a new, very serious competitor coming.
Mamdouh, Salameh, this agreement was penciled in for an initial 6 months right now, but could that change depending on what happens with prices and output and so on, especially given as well what Hossein Askari was saying earlier about cheating and countries not sticking to their targets?
Any agreement could change from time to time, and OPEC and plus Russia have been monitoring changes in the global oil market. It could change in 6 weeks if the prices start to go up very significantly. I am a great believer, and here I take note of what the second speaker has said, but I disagree with him completely. Low oil prices are very bad for the United States as well as for the global economy. The global economy is made of 3 major parts: the oil industry, the economies of the global producing countries, and of course, investments around the world. These 3 are affected adversely by low oil prices, as we have seen between 2014 and 2016. A good oil price, and here I am talking about a range of $100 to $130 a barrel, is good for the global economy, as it invigorates these big chunks of the global economy, 3 big chunks of the global economy.
Mamdouh, Salameh, I'm curious. Curious about your point earlier that the low oil prices are bad for the U.S. economy. That means low gas prices at the pump for millions of Americans. How is that a bad thing?
Yes, I tell you, it might act as a tax cut, but you have to see the whole picture. The shale oil industry needs a price between 60 to 70 to break even, and the shale oil industry is growing in importance because it employs 2% of the workforce in the United States. Without higher oil prices, they will lose at least 2 million barrels of their production, in addition to the thousands, if not millions, of people made redundant. And the third part is that the United States is an integral part of the global economy. If the global economy is adversely affected by low oil prices, the American economy is equally affected because it's part of the global economy. So it is no good having a short-term benefit of a tax cut when the whole global economy is affected.
Hossein Askari, what's your view on that?
Well, I would like to go back to one thing, and then, because we do have some disagreements here. If I may, I can prove this, is that when oil prices were around $80 a barrel, I said that they will go down to between $30 to $40 a barrel. And there was a reason for that, and that reason is still there. In the past, we used to say that Saudi Arabia is the swing producer, that it can affect the market with its oil output. Now what you have is global shale oil and gas production are the swing producers. If oil prices go up a little bit, there's more shale output. And I think the danger for OPEC is that fracking is not just any longer in the United States. It is going to be spreading to other parts of this world. And so that with oil, and everybody used to say that, in fact, shale oil production would go down if oil prices go down below 50. That was wrong. It has been proven to be wrong. And in fact, what you can see is that oil prices will not go to 100 to 130. That is a dream which will never come true.
All right, Nikolay, Surgov, I'll give what's probably going to be the last word to you then.
Well, I don't think that Russia is aiming for $130 for a barrel. I think Russia is actually trying to have a balanced price of about $70, $80, which makes the oil production profitable for Russia. But still, I think there is a huge concern on behalf of Moscow that we have a change in situation in the oil market, and that is why Russia decided to work closely with the Saudis, because they are the only potential partners who can deal with us nowadays, taking into consideration the tensions between Moscow and Washington. So I think that this particular partnership will stand, and I think both producers will do their best to stabilize the market. But within a couple of years, we'll definitely see very serious changes if the U.S. Shale oil industry continues to develop at the current pace. But for now, for the short term, we expect a moderate growth of oil prices, and that is why the decision was taken, I think. But there is still no solution for the longer term, because we'll have to adjust to the fracking situation, to the growing shale oil production, and it will be a problem very soon for everybody, for the established players of the market.
All right, and on that we will leave it. Thank you to all three of you, Nikolay Surgov, Mamdouh Salameh, and Hossein Askari. Thanks very much for being on Inside Story. And as always, thank you for watching. Remember, you can see this program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Hazem, Sika, and the whole team here in Doha, bye for now.